It's the 3rd of July, 1984. Freddie, a new hire at Unit of Medical Supply Warehouse, begins his training with manager Frank when exposed to the chemical Trioxin, the same chemical that reanimated the dead back in 1969. Will the military be able to contain the threat again, or will the dead rise again? Return of the Living Dead, directed by Dan O'Bannon and released in 1985, begins with Freddie, played by Tom Matthews, and Frank, played by James Karen, exposing themselves to the trioxin, the chemical that supposedly brought back the living dead in George Romero's classic Night of the Living Dead, as explained by Frank.
Did you see that movie, Night of the Living Dead? Did you know that movie was based on a true case? What really happened was, back in 1969, there was a chemical spill, 2,4,5-trioxin it's called. And it made all the dead bodies kind of jump around as though it was alive.
We then get introduced to the gang. Looking for a good time, they decide to go and wait for Freddie to get off work since he knows where all the parties are, deciding to hang out at a cemetery that just happens to be right next to the warehouse. Don't ask how it got there, but it's a surprise too that'll help us later. When Freddie and Frank finally awake, they contemplate on what to do, leading to this hilarious back and forth.
Over everything, stupid asshole! Watch your tongue, boy, if you like this job! Like this job? What the cops will do to this company? Who cares about the company? Think of my reputation! Your reputation!
Finally settling on calling Bert the owner of the business.
Bert, Frank, we have a little problem.
We're introduced to this older, high-ranking military officer coming home that just happens to treat his wife the way Eustace treats Muriel from Courage the Cowardly Dog. He's been tasked with retrieving the missing containers, but we'll get back to this great American hero later.
Do you ever fantasize about being killed?
How's everything about dying?
Trash, played by 80s bombshell beauty Linnea Quigley, monologues about her fantasy of being ripped apart violently as she undresses, all the while dancing on a grave while party time. By 45 Grave plays in the background. For those who don't know, this is a certified hood classic. Bert, played by Clu Gallagher, scolds Frank for his idiocracy, considering that a cadaver that they had in the storage freezer is now alive. Left with no other option, Bert suggests movie logic will do the trick, so he hands Frank a pickaxe, preps Freddie to open the freezer, and tells Frank to aim for the head. When they finally get the freezer open, the zombie runs straight towards Bert. When they finally pin the fucker down, they pickaxe his head. It does nothing. Even when its head is cut off, it still moves around.
It worked in the movie! But it ain't working now, Frank. You mean the movie line?
So Bert then suggests taking it to the morgue that just happens to be on the other side of the cemetery. How about that? Ernie, played by Don Kafka, preps a body when Bert sneaks up on him. Ernie gives us a fun fact about rigor mortis.
See, rigor mortis starts in the brain, and it spreads down to the internal organs and finally settles in the muscles.
But Bert is there on business, sweet-talking Ernie into a no-questions-asked kind of favor. Like any right-minded person, Ernie is hesitant not to buy Bert's rabid weasel story, so Bert shows him an arm that grabs Ernie by the leg. Freaked out, he agrees to burn the body. Chuck, the new wave-looking guy, played by John Philbin, shoots a shot at Cassie, played by Jewel Shepard, but gets rejected harshly. She tells him to go choke a chicken. With it nearing 10 o'clock, Tina, played by Beverly Randolph, heads over to wait for Freddie. Over at the morgue, the gentlemen burn the body parts, but unaware the chemicals released with the smoke are mixing with the rain clouds. As it begins to rain, the group runs to Suicide's car for shelter, but the convertible is no help. Frank and Freddie are looking a bit ghoulish, concerned. They call the ambulance. That's when the dead soon begin to rise. Back with Tina, she runs into the iconic Tarman. She narrowly escapes when the rest of the group show up. Suicide, played by Mark Venturini, is the first of the group to be killed by the Tarman, who's hungry for one thing and one thing only. You see, I told you the cemetery was gonna come in handy later. The paramedics arrive at the funeral home. When they check for their pulse and they both get nothing, they declare Freddie and Frank clinically deceased. Spider, Tina, and Scuzz make it to the funeral home when they're greeted by Ernie.
Freeze, you're dead! Don't shoot you! Are you crazy? Are you on PCP?
Chuck and Casey safely make it to the warehouse. The paramedics are taken out quickly. The trio give Bert and Ernie the news about what's been going on.
That warehouse on the other side.
Which warehouse?
The medical supply.
Shit!
And then
God damn!
They go to the morgue to regroup. Ernie heads to the car, running into zombies consuming its favorite comfort food. With nowhere else to run, they board up the funeral home. Bert gives the rest of the missing details to the group. Ernie has the misfortune of diagnosing Freddie and Frank with a horrible case of rigor mortis. More paramedics bite the dust as zombies decide to break in. Scuzz is the next one of the group to go. Scuzz is played by... Oh Jesus. Oh god, oh fuck, this can't be real. Anywho, they manage to capture a living torso. They begin to interrogate it in one of the most bone-chilling scenes I have ever seen.
Brains
What about the pain?
makes the pain go away.
That's right, these zombies eat brains in order to tolerate the pain of being dead. Zombie Quigley has risen and is craving some brains. Oh yeah, Chuck and Casey seem to be doing just fine. The group decide to lock Frank and Freddie up in the chapel until they can figure out exactly what's going on. Tina refuses to leave Freddie's side. Finally, the cops arrive. Let's see if they can do something about this matter.
Send more cops.
Freddie finally turns and attacks Tina. In the scuffle, Frank makes a run for it. Spider and Bert snag a cop car, only to end up back at the warehouse. Freddie breaks out of the chapel and is on a rampage looking for Tina. Frank honorably burns himself. Ernie and Tina barricade themselves up in the attic. The warehouse group make it to the basement to call the police, but the zombies get there quicker, wiping out the whole police blockade. Bert says fuck it and calls a government number on the tank, connecting the call to the military officer from the very beginning. After taking down the information and relaying it back to headquarters, the government retaliates with a contingency plan. And what's that plan, you may ask? Sending a fucking nuke to destroy about 20 blocks worth.
You hear anything?
Believing it's all well and good, the Big G calls it a day, and so it begins to rain again. In his directorial debut, Dan O'Bannon creates a cult classic film beloved by horror and punk fans alike. Return of the Living Dead premiered on August 16, 1985. It was met with critical acclaim with moderate box office success. Successful enough to spawn 4 sequels, though you could argue they drop in quality. If you'd like me to cover them, let me know. As for this one, it's deserving of its reputation, not only as a cult film, but a great film in general. From well-casted actors like Linnea Quigley, she is fantastic in everything she is. I'm Looking at You auditions 1978.
It became apparent that most of the female applicants were non-professionals, just star-struck kids in search of the impossible dream.
Tom Matthews, who plays Tommy Jarvis, aka Tommy Salami in Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, and in the first sequel to this movie, Return of the Living Dead Part 2, alongside James Karen, aka the Pathmark guy.
And savings at Pathmark 7 days a week. And with these coupons from Sunday's paper, get 30...
And lastly, the main man himself, Spider, played by Miguel A. Nunez Jr., chewing up every scene he's in. Earlier in the movie, it had brought up the fact that Night of the Living Dead was actually a real event that took place. While this isn't an official sequel, it does add a lot to the modern definition of what we think a zombie is. While the term zombie comes from Haitian folklore and voodoo, George A. Romero's zombies were actually referred to and called as ghouls, eventually getting mixed up with the reanimated dead of Haitian folklore. The base idea was set: a reanimated corpse who eats people can't die unless it's shot in the head and has a certain amount of intelligence. Return expands on that idea by having them exclusively eat brains, not die by getting axed to the head, speaking, and maybe even running. I also love some of the names that they use, like You Need a Medical Supply, You Need It, We Got It, none larger. And the name above the chapel entrance, We Chapel of the Dawn, which I think is a reference to the legitimate sequel to the Romero classic, Dawn of the Living Dead, or as it was better known in Italy, Zombie. Let me know if you guys want to see that too. I also couldn't help but notice that those canisters looked awfully familiar. Before I move on to my favorite and least favorite part of the film, I want to quickly talk about the soundtrack, because goddamn does it have an assortment of bands from the time. And I don't know if you've heard some of them. The Cramps, TSOL, The Damned, 45 Grave, which I mentioned earlier. And how about the heaviest of them all, Ludwig van Beethoven.
Bit of the old Ludwig van.
Alrighty, enough of my blabbering. Let's see what my favorite and least favorite parts of the movie were. My favorite part of the movie would have to be Linnea Quigley stripping. No, I'm kidding. Although... no, it's the living torso that they keep captive. The way it cries out in pain, the agonizing pain of being reanimated. Kinda like the agonizing pain of being alive.
Pain.
And my least favorite part of the film would probably have to be when it ends. Because it ends. I give this movie a 9 out of 10. I can't get enough of this film, and I definitely put it in my top 10, and I definitely recommend you guys to check it out on your own. Alrighty folks, that's all for tonight. Tune in next time when we try to survive a slumber party massacre.